Well, welcome to you all. It's so nice to see so many smiling faces. Thank you for making me feel so welcome. I'd like to start out by telling you an urban legend, one of those urban myths that I've heard in New York. And it's a story about a New York antique dealer who was driving through New England and stopped in a small town and saw that they were having a yard sale. And he asked them if they had anything else, and they took him up to an attic, and it was full of old furniture. And he said, "But do you know what this is worth?" It could have been shaker furniture, which is very simple, but is now worth a great deal. He said, "Do you know what you have? Do you know what this is worth?" So in this sense, I would like to come to you today and tell you about the treasures that we have as an organization. And we are truly, truly blessed. And I like to use the examples of our founders as archetypes. They have been in existence for so long that they are really spiritual archetypes that we can tap into. And starting off with, of course, Colonel Olcott. Since this is Olcott, our center, I'd like to start off with Colonel Olcott. A remarkable man. Anybody who knew him in 1875 would never have believed that he would have gone on his career path that he did. He was a very successful New York lawyer. He could have gone into New York politics. He could have become an assemblyman. But with the intersection of meeting HPB, his life was truly transformed. And his trip to India, you know, there's this wonderful example in his diaries where when he gets to India, first thing he does is he kneels on the ground and kisses it because he's truly in his own homeland. He is finding himself. All of these journeys are tales about finding yourself. His own teachers have this wonderful comment about him. Him we can trust under all circumstances. Could you imagine the masters saying that about you? That they can trust you under all circumstances. That's so remarkable. And his faithful service is pledged to us, come ill, come well. Where can we find equal devotion? He is one who never questions but obeys, who may make innumerable mistakes out of excessive zeal, but is never unwilling to repair his fault, even at the cost of greatest humiliation. She traveled throughout India at a time when, you know, he went into the most remote areas. He traveled on a bullock cart. Imagine traveling on a cart that has no traction, just wooden wheels, on all of these roads that are nothing but rocks, and sometimes no roads at all. He truly, when he was in India, there was no other. He really was at home. He was at one there. So I think if we were to think of him in an archetypal way, we can say that he perhaps is representative of the tarot card of the emperor. Everyone is aware of the tarot these days. It's one of the massive images that we all know. So you know the emperor is the figure sitting there. He represents strength, power. He was a remarkable administrator. And of course, like everyone else, he was human. One of the things that modern psychology has brought up to us is that we do have this shadow side also. We are good and bad. We are complex individuals. And the problem with an authoritarian figure is as they get older, the authority seems to congeal. He made, toward the end of his life, a number of people who were not particularly happy with what he did. Swami Vivekananda, who approached him and asked for some money to come to America for the World Parliament of Religions. Colonel Olcott totally dismissed that. And as you know, the Swami saved up enough money, came here to Chicago, slept in a boxcar before the opening of the World Parliament, And as he got on the platform, literally took it by storm. He was the great figure when he said, "Brothers and sisters of America," and that Parliament was his. But he never forgot that in his time of need, this man in this organization really did not reach out. Another person is Angarika Dharmapala, who helped reestablish Buddhism in India. Worked as Colonel Olcott's translator, helped revive the center at Buddha Gaya as a center for Buddhist pilgrimage. He and Olcott also fell out. And of course, perhaps the biggest one was Mr. W.Q. Judge, whose portrait is downstairs. Judge was about 24 years old when the society started. And of course, Olcott, being a senior person, couldn't believe that Judge would have any communication with the Mahatmas. As you know, you may well know the story of Bernadette of Lourdes. She's the one who saw the Virgin. And as thanks to her, the church decided to lock her away in the monastery, right? Because what else would she do? She couldn't be in the outside world. But her hardest critic was the Mother Superior of that monastery, who said, you're a fraud. She said, I have done privation. I have sacrificed. I have done everything. And the Virgin should show herself to you? Well, of course, it was only found out later that she had terminal cancer and was in great suffering all the time. So, but as I say, people are people. They're whole beings. And as we always say, we love our friends not only for their good things, but for their bad too, right? So that's Mr. Olcott. Well, HPB is the one we all know. I don't have to tell this group about Madame Blavatsky. I've spent so much of my life with this woman in a nice way. Somebody referred to her as a volcano in petticoats. They said being with her sometimes was like having your scalp removed very slowly. She was like the little girl who had the little curl right in the middle of her forehead. When she was good, she was very, very good. But when she was bad, she was very, very bad. But yet here's another case of a transformation. No one who knew Helena Petrovna before 1875 could imagine the Helena Petrovna we knew. Here was a person who loved horseback riding. Imagine at a time when women could not travel alone. A single woman could not check into a hotel by herself. Jobs for women were chaperones, teachers. Thankfully, the telephone came along. They could become telephone operators. But she made this transformation. They said when she was writing Isis Unveiled, she didn't leave her rooms for 6 months. She had this ability to sit and just these ideas came right out of her. Churning, churning, churning. I'm going to churn in a second. But she had this remarkable devotion to the ideal of theosophy, devotion to her teachers, this unfailing devotion. So if she was, in the tarot, we could say she was the high priestess. She is the initiatrix. She is the person who holds the scroll, who holds the teaching. And then, of course, I'd like to look at two people, but as one person. And that is Mr. Judge and Annie Besant. Because I feel you cannot understand one without understanding the other. Mr. Judge, as you know, was the founder of the American section. He died very early. He was the quiet one. You always have to look out for the quiet ones, right? He's the one who, did all the work. HPB was the leader. Olcott was the administrator. He was in the background. Yet, he was able to take theosophy and make it understandable to Americans. It's amazing to think that there were members when what was still considered Indian territory, on the West Coast, everywhere. He didn't travel and lecture so much, but he inspired people to do that. And I would say his complement was Annie Besant, who was truly a remarkable, remarkable woman. Here was somebody who had reached the height that a woman could in Victorian England. She was elected to the London School Board. Women could not be elected to Parliament. They couldn't be elected to anything. They had no right to vote. She was elected to the London School Board for the East End, which was a very poor part of London. She's the person who brought in free lunch programs for the children because she thought if they didn't have a full stomach, how would they study? How could they focus? And of course, you know that she went to India, played a great part in the Indian Home Rule movement at a time when Indians themselves were either very radical, wanted to totally remove themselves from the empire, or just simply go along with it. She started this Home Rule movement that really advocated for this idea of India being self-government, just like she wanted what was considered dominion status, which Canada had, which Australia had. And yet, though Indian troops fought in the First War, they had no rights. So she galvanized this nation. Imagine, she traveled everywhere, lectured everywhere, stimulated people to have this idea of India, which was not a totality at that time. It was a number of separate princely states. You would go from one area to another area to another area. Languages would be different, culture would be different, ethnicities would be different. She promoted this idea of India, Mother India. In fact, her mantra was Bharat Mata Jai Hai, Mother India will be free. And she truly devoted herself to this wonderful idea because, as she said, India, which plays a special part in our theosophical cosmology, she said, it is the only country where all the religions of humanity are functioning equally. Well, of course, this was the beginning of the 20th century. Certainly these ideals have come around. So these three youths, these three have combined to give us this most wonderful thing of all, the Theosophical Society. And we need to see it as they see it. This was this constant source of inspiration for them. The Theosophical Society as the outer court to an inner reality. Mrs. Besant herself has an interesting quote about that the Theosophical Society has never been a mere exoteric society without touch with the unseen world. It has been, ever since its foundation, a ladder with its foot on earth, but its top in the heavenly places. I like this idea, ladder meaning progression. It has ever been, since its foundation, a ladder with its foot on earth and its rung in its top in the heavenly places. And anyone stepping off the ground onto its first rung might climb upwards, if he possessed the capacity to do so. The obstacles to climbing lay in the incapacity of the member, not in the absence of the necessary steps. I think it's a very profound idea that the ability to get higher, to reach more, lies within each of us. This idea also that in the Theosophical Society, unlike other groups, in other occult, metaphysical, esoteric groups, you are pretty well spoon-fed all along the way. As you pay as you go. As you pay, you'll learn. As you pay, you'll learn. Everything is nicely graded out for you. It's a nice esoteric caste system. But the Theosophical Society is so different, and perhaps a keynote of the time period. You are challenged to think for yourself. You are challenged to probe. Yes, we have the wonderful mechanism of so many great students, but the quest starts with you, and of course ends with you. So esoteric groups, let me just do a sidebar here about the nature of esoteric groups. And of course I'm lecturing, taking coals to Newcastle, as they say, lecturing to you. But esoteric groups are a response to a specific time period. They are the medicine for a sick humanity. You notice, HPB says you can trace all of these esoteric developments from the 1400s to today. And each time they have appeared, they have come to bring something to humanity that is sick, world-weary, sick of its own diseases. So while the Theosophical Society had an outer work, within each of these groups, there is a little nucleus that tells us about the future, which is an interesting idea. You know, Prometheus, the Greek deity, his name meant one who had foresight. He had a brother, you know, who was Epidemus, who could see in the past. That's the one we don't hear about. Because we all know what happened in the past, we want to know what happened in the future. But looking at these groups, you get an idea that within the movement itself, it gives you an indication of what is to come. And so in the 19th century Theosophical movement, though its work was about knowledge, the 19th century was all about knowing and knowledge. Those of you here are too young to remember, but I can remember seeing as a kid maps of the globe that still had so many parts that were unknown. It was about knowing the world, knowing things, cataloging so much. Knowledge was the way of receiving this. But times have changed. And in embryo in this, if you know, toward the end of HPB's life, she moved away from Isis, which is telling you that there is a path. You can sum up that big book, 1,200 pages, by just saying, she tells you that there were all of these great traditions, but different from the antiquarians of her time, it was a living tradition. It still existed. If you read the antiquarian literature of the time, they put together symbols, and maybe it meant this, and maybe that, but it was a relic of the past, like some old monument. HPB's shift was to tell us that it was still alive today, and it could be reached by those who wanted to. The secret doctrine, of course, gives more of the theory of this. But toward the end of the life, she shifts, of course, key to theosophy, she shifts to the voice of the silence, which, as you know, the basic message is to live to benefit mankind is the first step. To practice the 6 glorious virtues, the second. You know, and there are people who are saying, oh, you know, theosophy doesn't teach you practical, it doesn't give you this, it doesn't give you that. No, I beg to disagree. For instance, the basis of the voice of the silence are those 6 wonderful paramitas, which is the basis of a lot of Mahayana Buddhism. The ideal of the Bodhisattva, the ideal of the Christ, the compassionate one, who truly lives for humanity. And as you know, today, the whole movement among young people is finding myself. I want to find myself. I was walking down the street in New York some time ago, and I heard 2 young girls talking, and one said, my mind must be free to learn all I can about me. I said, well, atta girl, you go. You go, girl. My mind must be free to learn all I can about me. I said, well, there it is. Out of the mouths of babes, right? But this is the emphasis today. People want this self-fulfillment. That is the test of a spiritual philosophy. I remember many years ago when I was going through a very difficult time in my life, and I tried everything, meditation. Of course, as theosophists, we're limited about how many things we can try, right? Music, everything, and nothing seemed to work. And finally, I threw the I Ching, because Emily Sellon, who our library is named after, was a big fan of the I Ching. When there was a dilemma, you threw the I Ching. And I threw the I Ching, and it said, what good is a spiritual philosophy unless it can get through difficult times? I said, this is what I need to hear? This is the advice that you're giving me? What good is a spirit? But you know, it's true. What good is a spiritual philosophy unless it can get you through hard times and difficult times? This is why we shouldn't worry about adversity and all of those things, because it brings out that challenge, the challenge to develop all of those inner strengths. Remember, we have to think of ourselves as we really are, not as the personalities that are fleeting, but each of us is this divine spark on this wonderful pilgrimage. We have had innumerable existences. When CWL was alive, they would say, in our past lives, we had many husbands and wives, right? We've had this innumerable experiences, but yet this divine spark is in each attempt is looking for this expression, looking for its fulfillment. Because if there is truly one reality, then each of us are just part and parcel of that same divine experience. I always think about it like, you've ever seen the close-ups of the eye of a fly that are multifaceted little segments? We are all of these segments, and each of us plays a part. Each of us can be there for someone. You know, the people who have had the near-death experiences, I've never had a near-death experience. I've had a near-life experience, but that's really about it. But they said that it wasn't the big things that they saw that was important. It was something as simple as being there for someone, reaching out for someone. You know, when I see little kids crying, I say, you know, don't cry. You'll have plenty of opportunity later in life, you know. It's true. You know, don't cry. But the worst thing is for people, there are people out in this world who have no hope. They're lost, they're struggling in darkness, and yet we recognize that there is this wonderful dynamism behind us, behind our movement. Just a few other things, and because I like to have a discussion and talk, because I'm always interested in what you have on your mind. And of course, I also know that in this day and age, people don't come to listen, they come to talk at meetings, you know. So I just want to tell you just a few things more. When you do research, you will find in science, they talk about verification, validation. You do your research, and then you find additional proofs to what you're doing. As I was preparing for this, I came across a statement by Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche, who's a Tibetan Rinpoche, the author of Tibetan Yogas of Dream and Sleep. Imagine you can do yoga while you're dreaming and sleeping. But he starts off his book by saying, a well-known saying in Tibetan states, one should explain the lineage and the history in order to cut doubt about the authenticity of the teaching and the transmission. One should explain the lineage and the history in order to cut doubt about the authenticity of the teaching and transmission. So we have this wonderful lineage, this interconnectedness. You remember HPB's last words, keep the link unbroken. There is an interconnectedness. Spiritual groups don't start from people deciding to meet and tell the world what to do. There is an inner spiritual transmission. All the great spiritual traditions tell us, especially Tibetan Buddhism, there is an inner lineage, right, that brings people together, keeps them together. So lineage, its history, and then, of course, its transmission. Now, Joy and I, who have had many wonderful conversations about this, and I told her this story, Dora Kunz, who some of you know. I once asked her a very simple question in New York. I said, were you at that 1925 convention at Adyar where Krishnamurti was standing under the banyan tree and he was talking about the world teacher comes to do this, the world teacher comes to do that, and then he switched to the first person, I come to do such and such. Well, 3 hours later, we had barely gotten to 1925, but she turned to me and she said, well, you know, when I tell you these things at my age, it's not gossip, it's history. So I think it's the same thing. It's not God. What is history, right? But all of these stories put together. And I'll kind of wrap this up so we can have more of a discussion. I want to give you a quote from Colonel Olcott from his inaugural address in 1875. And when you hear it, you'll understand it's the same things we are talking about today, our same concerns. Listen to this. The present small number of its members is not to be considered at all in the judging of its probable career. 1870 odd years ago, the whole Christian church could be contained within a Galilean fisherman's hut. Good point, right? No, it is not a question of numbers how great an effect this society will have upon religious thought. I will go further and say upon the science and philosophy of the age. Great events sometimes come from far modest beginnings. What is it then which makes me say in deeper seriousness and in full knowledge of its truth, I have said? What is it that makes me not only content but proud to stand for the brief moment as the mouthpiece and figurehead of this movement, risking abuse, misrepresentation, and every vile assault? It is the fact that in my soul, I feel that behind us, behind our little band, behind our feeble newborn organization, there gathers a mighty power that nothing can withstand, the power of truth. Because I feel that we are only the advance guard holding the pass until the main body shall come up. Because I feel that we are enlisted in a holy cause, and the truth now as always is mighty and will prevail. I think those, and this is at the moment our society was born in 1875, and a lot of these ideas are still with us. You know, this whole idea of judging our success by numbers is a dangerous thing because what then do you use if we had 20,000 members in America? Still nothing compared to filling a football stadium. You just have to keep going and going. Our international president once told me this story, that she had started in India a little magazine, not connected with theosophy, but about bringing Indian ideals to the forefront. And there was a lack of response, to put it kindly. And she was telling this to Krishnamurti, and he said, is it just a question of numbers, or is the thing worth doing? Do you believe in this thing enough to do it, and is it worth doing? This is the question now I pose to you. And hopefully you will give me some answers, I'm sure you will. So I turn it to you, over to you now.
Of all of the people in the Theosophical movement, I have always been drawn to the role that Annie Besant played. And I would really be interested to hear you tell us one, two things that, as you look at her life, what most impressed you about her?
This tremendous dynamism. She was working till she literally dropped in her 80s. I mean, she traveled throughout India. Those of you who have been to India today, it's, oh, we think it bad, but imagine 100 years ago. Traveled in all sorts of conveniences. I'll tell you one story specifically. When if she went to India, the Indians, of course, would feed her. Now, you know, in India, to eat with someone is considered the greatest of honors, to eat with Indians themselves in their homes. They would always give her one particular dish that she really disliked, right? It was always on the menu. So she decided she would eat this first and get it out of the way. Well, they thought that she liked this, so they kept giving her more and more of this. And she said later on in life, well, she actually grew to like it, which was the end result. So, but you know, she could inspire, is it C. Rajadasa or Arundel said, she made men. She inspired people to also carry on. You know, our society has been remarkably fortunate with all of its faults. And I think we need to switch from the old model to affirmation, because affirmation is very big today, you know. Affirmation is very, very big. She inspired people to do an enormous amount of work on all sorts of levels. They said that if you traveled with her, she was keen, very early in the morning, she would be the first one up, and she would be making coffee for everyone. She had a little coffee machine that she would start at, and that was the beginning of her day. I think this tremendous zeal, again, like the thing she shares with Olcott and HPB, this tremendous devotion to the masters. For these people, those great spiritual teachers were not just abstracts or something removed. They were living, vibrant forces. They inspired them, you know. They inspired them to keep going, because there's a line in Light on the Path about, as great as the distance between you and the sinner, the distance between you and the master is even greater, you know. But if we can think or imagine or feel that behind this movement are truly great spiritual forces whose work is the benefit of humanity, to move humanity up slowly, surely, like a child. You know, they refer to humanity as the great orphan. And how do you treat a child? If you slap a child down every time it makes a mistake, that child will end up shooting people down the road. If you try to bring out or encourage the goodness of that child, by example, that child may grow and blossom. So she had this tremendous dynamism, her utter devotion to the society, totally, truly devoted. And yet also remarkably great intellect. I mean, she couldn't attend university at that time. Imagine, women weren't allowed to. She lost the custody. She truly knew this world. She lost the custody of her children because she had published a pamphlet on birth control, you know, at a time when that just, you know, was unheard of. Though when she joined the TS, you know, HPB's idea is just say no to anything like that. And she took away her pamphlets, stopped publishing them. But as one later critic reminded us, who is in charge of the United Nations World Food Program, if she had come to India and promulgated birth control, it would have been a different matter in that country, because overpopulation, as you know, is a horrendous, horrendous problem there. It's the world's largest democracy. They have a 350 million middle class out of a billion population, and still growing. As you know, Indians are the greatest export of India. Well, I tell you, all the doctors and tech people and all of those things, so we are truly, but I think the things we read about in the books, they were really realities to them. And that's what inspired them just to keep going. Those of you who have traveled, who have lectured, know that you get tired at times. Perhaps you're not on at that moment, but she kept going and going and going till literally she just dropped, you know, all of them. So this dynamism, this commitment to the ideal and the organization. She once had a comment, HPB gave the world theosophy. Colonel Olcott gave the world the Theosophical Society. Which was the greater gift? Well, of course, so it's a dicey question. In 1991 at Adyar, I gave, on HPB's death date, May 8th, I gave a lecture on her there. And the speaker before me was an elderly Indian freedom fighter, Mr. Atuch Padwardhan, who had worked for Indian independence since he was a young man. And the person before, they read some quotes, you know, it was like an extended White Lotus Day. They read some nice quotes that the TS was meant to be the salvation of humanity. And when he came on, he said, after hearing that the Theosophical Society was meant to be the salvation of humanity, the situation is far graver than I imagined. It's true, it's true story, yes. But yes, you know, this commitment, and each of us does it in its own way. You can't live another person's ideals. They can be held up for us as a measure to what we want to be, but each of us has to find that fulfillment and expression. That's why you can't judge people in the organization by somebody else. You can't say this is, you know, this person is not doing the job of that person. No, but this person is this person. And we have really been blessed by the people in it. You know, there's so much that we have. There's so much on the positive side that we really need to move to that affirmation side for a smaller group. Otherwise, we'll just be a handful of people just talking to ourselves, complaining about each other. But to think of the positives and the goodness of our organization. Joy and I have been talking. We've had the good pleasure to know so many great people who are all passed away. I'll give you another story about Annie Besant. She, really, it's because of her that the American section really revitalized. When this split came, it's a whole other area, and it was over 100 lodges in America, property, everything. The little group of people who decided to remain connected with Adyar, and imagine this, the reason of the split was that the Americans claimed that the society was started in America, had never left America, and what was done in India and the rest of the world were just separate organizations, though they sent them the dues and sent all the applications to India, so it's a hard thing to play. That handful of people, 4 or 5 lodges, Annie Besant came to America, lectured throughout the entire country with Countess Wachtmeister, lectured everywhere, small towns. Sometimes she would go to a town, there might only be 4 or 5 people in a room that held 100. And she tells a story about how the woman who was the president of the lodge apologized to her that there was such a small turnout. She said, "What do you mean? The room is full," right? She could see on other levels. When we meet, CWL has this wonderful piece on the hidden side of lodge meetings. When we meet together, when we turn our attentions to these ideals, it becomes a mechanism for those higher forces to come into the world, to work unseen. They don't work like a business model. We don't know. It touches the hearts of each of us to become more aware. "O Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love." The simplest things, because remember, we are a family. We are family, right? All my little sisters and me. We are a family. This idea of brotherhood was totally different at a time when there were rigid distinctions, class distinctions, race distinctions, ethnic distinctions. Now the barriers keep getting broken down. In India, different castes didn't integrate. I remember one old Indian member, Joy remembers, Mr. Shashadri at Adyar, and I asked him, he was in his 90s, I said, "What drew you to the Theosophical Society?" And he said it was the only place that he could go where he could be felt an equal in his own country, that British and Indians and different groups could meet, and they could be free of the burden of the label of who you are, what you're supposed to be, and meet and discuss and share. And this is why our annual meetings are so important. Aside from the lectures, it's cross-pollination. We meet, we share, we discuss, we share our joy, our laughter, our simple meeting. That's the enrichment of life, right? The harvest of life. This is why the monad comes into existence, right? To meet, to share, to understand what does it mean to be truly human, right? The devas and all of that don't really know it anymore. The elementals don't know it before us. But we have this wonderful opportunity to be, and at the end of our lives, when we are shown this life review, because you truly do have this review, and it isn't like a movie where you see everything. And they say death itself is not a painful thing. The English poet Keats has a wonderful line. "Can death be sleep when life is but a dream and our greatest fear is but to awake?" Right? So when at the end of it, do we see that our path through life has been more tears causing that suffering, which the great ones behind us are supposed to be removing? Are we making their work more difficult? If we truly believe that there stands behind us those wonderful, great, great figures, who we call the masters, the adepts, whatnot. They're not only masters of wisdom, they are masters of compassion. They are the part of this Bodhisattva tradition, the Nirmanakaya in Tibetan Buddhism, who exist for all of suffering humanity, who make, think of the person in need, think of the person in fear, think of the person, you are the crown of creation. Those of you who are here, you have that glimmer. You've seen the light. You have the light on the path. You know where things are going. You know that there is this ladder. And you can choose what level you want to progress. But the people in this world are living in darkness. This is the bottom line. You know, there's a great Mahayana text called The Questions of King Milinda. And King Milinda is a Buddhist king, and he's questioning the monk, you know, about this. Do Buddhas arise? Do Buddhas this? And Milinda says, the Nagasena, the monk says, Reverend Sir, regardless of whether Buddhas arise or not arise, human suffering exists. Let us not get away from the central problem. And if we can help humanity remove that thorn of suffering, you know, the Buddha says when somebody is shot in an arrow, you don't start doing a diagnostic. Oh, well, what kind of arrow is it? What kind of wood is it? You try to remove it right away. If we can help humanity in that sense, if we are a truly joyous nucleus, because this is, you know, our society is existing, but the world has changed remarkably around us. It's like you can make the best fountain pens in the world and still be good at them, but when everybody's using a keyboard, your business may suffer. So in a sense, we are making these great fountain pens, but the world is using something else. And you know, for all of the things that people have knocked the New Age, it's worthwhile to see the things they have brought up, which is about this self-fulfillment. You know, they've recently had a guru in New York who has come through, Amma, the hugging guru, and all she does is give you a hug. I knew somebody who they went at 6 o'clock in the afternoon. They were finally able to see her at 3 in the morning. She filled the largest auditorium we have in New York. Nothing is charged. Can you imagine? Yet this simple need to be embraced, you know. Though some of our members, you know, I remember hugging somebody and they were like this. So that's as much of a hug they could do. But, you know, we are trying to bring out, those of you who know about the chakras, which is a big thing now in New Age, though in India you don't really hear, people don't talk about the chakras as a separate thing. But as you know, if you were to say Theosophists, we're in the throat chakra. We love to talk and discuss about things, right? There's a story I tell, and I owe it to Diana Dunningham Chapotin. I knew her when she was Dunningham. She's Chapotin. Who knows what else she may be next. But she told this story about, and I know I've worn it threadbare, but I'll end with this. The Christian, the Jew, and the Theosophist die, and they meet on the other side, right? And they're walking along, and the road forks, and the Christian and the Jew go one way, and the Theosophist goes the other way. And where the Christian and the Jew goes, it says road to heaven, and where the Theosophist goes, it says discussion about heaven, right? So we will discuss, but you know, that is because we have developed manas. You know, all of our studying and reading has made that monastic faculty so intense. And of course, which kind of makes us irritable somewhat too, you know. If we're not grounded, we get kind of irritable because we see everything that's right and then we can see the flaws. But we really need now to move up to here, which is the higher aspect of the heart. You know, the New Age movement is the open heart, the bodhicitta. Love is all you need, right? All we need is love. All love is all you need. What the world needs now is love, sweet love. That's the only thing there's too little of. Popular culture has reached this stage. We've moved above the navel, thankfully, at least some of us. We're here. But the brow chakra is really a higher version of the heart. It isn't just the physical love. It isn't just the embrace alone, but the caring, right? That a mother has for the child. You know, if you have children, you will know sometimes your children can be awfully mean, right? But you don't love them any the less. They may reject you. But as my own mother reminds me, there's nothing like a mother's love. And she keeps reminding me of that constantly. There's nothing, you only have one mother, right? And there's nothing like a mother's love. So we really need to move from the talking about the experience to the experience itself. And this is what people want today. They don't want to talk about the experience. They want the experience. And how can we then move to that state where we have this experience. And if I don't stop, we'll have no experience at all. So I would like to have any further questions. Come now. Yes.
You mentioned the other two, but what were Annie's?
Oh, yes. Thank you for reminding me.
Judge
Judge would have definitely been the hanged man. You know, the tarot card, it's a card of sacrifice. The hanged man is a card where somebody's hanging upside down. It's sacrifice. Annie Besant would definitely be strength. She would definitely be the card strength, where she's opening the mouth of the lion, the woman with the lion. And of course, what is the lion but the symbol of the British Raj, right? That was the symbol of England, the big lion, right? She's opening. Somebody should really do a Theosophical Tarot with not only the major figures, but with a lot of the minor figures. Swords would be kind of difficult to portray, but cups and all of those other things. But we could have people as each and every one. With Photoshop, I'm sure we could put different people. Yes.
And who had the best sense of humor of the group?
They all had a sense of humor, different sense. HVB, of course, was a total bohemian. If the masters truly exist, you must ask, why did they choose this person who would be the least of a spiritual teacher? She was nothing like a spiritual teacher that we imagined. I was telling someone earlier on, Krishnamurti was having some particular problems, and somebody said, well, shouldn't a spiritual teacher act this way? And he said, how do you know what a spiritual teacher should do? Right? That's a good point. So HVB had a certain kind of humor, and they said she would roll up her sleeves and shake her fat, on her arms. If you notice, her hands are always like this, or with a fan, because you didn't see the dewlap, right? It was always like this. Colonel Olcott, to shock the Indian members, would swim in the Adyar River on his back with a cigar, reading the newspaper. Could you imagine? I'm sure all he needed was the top hat. He'd be floating in the Adyar River with a newspaper and a cigar, which must have shocked the Indians tremendously. HVB, of course, had this horrible sense of temper, but she certainly suffered. There's a story of an Indian member who went to visit her, and she thought it was someone else who was really a big figure, an Indian judge. And she put on her best clothes to meet him. And when she saw it was just this ordinary person, she flew into a rage. And her rages were truly rages to be, you think about rage, but this is unbridled fury. And he said to her, Madam, you teach all of these great ideals, but you don't have this restraint yourself. She said, well, that is my loss and your gain, because if I didn't have this temper, I would be somewhere else by now. It's a good point, right? Annie Besant had a delicate, sweet sense of humor. She was I've actually seen pictures of her laughing. She's always all of her pictures. These people were also constrained by their time period, what they thought would be necessary. I'm sure if they looked ahead 100 years, they'd be shocked how women dress today. Women didn't wear pants. The idea, women were still wearing the hobble skirt by 1910, which made you hobble along, which is a good thing, I'm sure men are the ones who have developed high heels, so you can still only hobble. But the idea of women wearing pants or casual dress would be considered shocking to them, immoral. But yet, it's moral for us. So times change, situations change. Esoteric groups are timeless, but they're not time-bound. So we mustn't become time-bound. We must work with the situation. If you are a good physician, you are going to really try to find out what the patient needs. You can't just give them a remedy that may not be the thing for them. So the early Theosophists really knew what was happening in the world. You read The Secret Doctrine, it's allusions to this, that, and every single thing. Any other? Yes.
I had a question in relation to Annie Besant and Maria Montessori.
Yes.
Because I was connected with it for 28 years, and I think the Montessori philosophy so fits in with Theosophy. Do you have any incidents about Maria Montessori?
Other than, during the war, she was interned at Adyar. She was a foreign citizen. And I think Kalakshetra still publishes the Montessori books. That's actually the only way you can get them. But education, there's an article on education if you're interested. There's a great site called Blavatsky News, and it's just sort of, I think it's some college kids who are doing it. But they do cover things that are, just Google Blavatsky News. There's a great one about theosophical education. From its very beginning, education has played part in the society. Annie Besant started numerous schools. Could it have been because of her background in education, in working for the London School Board? But the idea of teaching people in a new age, start with the child, allow them that freedom. Rudolf Steiner, again, also is another one who has schools. Start with the child and allow it to be expressive, and the child will become the child is father to the man.
One of the things that Blavatsky said in The Key to Theosophy is that we're not bringing you anything new. And I think this is a challenge, forcing individual theosophists always to think for themselves. You have to do the research, you have to find out, because you can't say they're going to hell or, you're a terrible sin or whatever. You have nothing like that. So I think often theosophists leave the society and come back to it because they find out that it grows on you and it's very hard to...
And part of our work, our real deep esoteric work, is the developing of new forms of consciousness. We have to move from this old monastic consciousness to the development of buddhimanas. Annie Besant says this very clearly, that part of our work is to develop this buddhimanas, which sees, embraces all in oneness. The development of those mental faculties to think for yourself. We are like those first fish that crawled out laboriously onto land. Fritz Kuhns had an article called A New Continent of Thought. We are moving slowly to a new awareness of, and you have to do it yourself. People can tell you everything. Religions, philosophies can tell you how to think, what to eat, how to sit, how to breathe, everything. And this was Krishnamurti's big comment. If all of those things worked, you'd all be enlightened by now, But esoteric movements transform with the times. Otherwise, we'd still be all studying the Vedas, But they transform as humanity needs, because esotericism is a multifaceted thing. It's like Mabel Collins describes it as a transparent jewel. If you have a beautiful jewel that's finished, by turning and looking at it, you really see, by looking at all its facets, you really see the total beauty of that stone. How are we doing for time?
You're good, Jake.
I am? Oh, thank you. Oh, you mean, time. Okay.
Any more questions?
Oh, you're allowed to. Go ahead.
Well, what do you think about the Higgs boson?
Talk into the mic.
Oh. What do you think about the Higgs boson, which is the new scientific discovery?
The God
and so
gene.
forth?
The God gene. Listen, science is always changing constantly. It used to be one thing, this thing. I had the great opportunity, my last book was all of these transactions that HPB in the Blavatsky Lodge, after The Secret Doctrine was published, they would meet every Thursday and discuss the book, go on and on and on. And her comment, she says, she's not at all, because science has one thing today, it'll have something tomorrow and have something else. If you see how dramatically the scientific view has changed from her own time, it's remarkable, from dead matter. Look at her ideas, this living universe. We live in a vibrant living universe. Science believes that totally now. We live in this vibrant world, the unity of life. Cyclicity, that's truly part and parcel of it. Hierarchies, this idea that this whole vibrant universe, and science is really looking, there is no dead matter anymore, as in her time. We know that neutrons and protons, this dynamic, living, vibrant universe. And all we have to do is to relax, breathe in the peace, and have that vibrancy. behind us. So before we go, let's have a moment where I want you to feel that vibrancy. I want you to open. All you have to do, the breath is a wonderful thing, isn't it? Prana, we breathe in. You know, if you weren't breathing, you'd be dead. I see none of you are dead here yet with my talk. But to simply sit, to breathe, and not to think about the thing, but to feel it and experience it, to feel that vibrancy, you know, that oh hidden life, vibrant in every atom, right? There is a vibrancy behind us, that it means to be truly, truly alive. I want you all to feel that dynamism, that mighty power that she talks about. And all you have to do is simply to be aware that it's there. It's so simple. Can you feel the power? At least realize that there is this wonderful unity, that life, we're living. Yeah. Well, I don't want you to become too addicted now. So just to give you a little taste, because you had a wonderful meditation before this. So I would like to close. Thank you for having me. Thank you for allowing me to share some of these ideas that, as you can tell, have really been a special part of my life. Joy and I will be talking. We still don't know what yet. We've had this discussion about quite what, so it'll be an experience for both of us, right? But it'll be great to talk about the things in our lives, things about the people, the places, you know, and remember, when Joy tells you these things at her age, it's not gossip, it's history. So thank you so much.